Today, my special guest is Marcel Petitpas. He helps high-growth agencies, creatives, consultancies, and service businesses track the right metrics and maximize their profitability. Marcel's the CEO and founder of Parakeeto, a consultancy turned software company that helps service businesses increase profitability and close more deals by generating accurate, data-driven estimates in seconds using their existing time tracking data. He's also the fractional COO of Goldfront, an award-winning creative agency that works with top Silicon Valley brands like Uber, Slack, Google, Keap, Robinhood, and more. Marcel is considered an expert on agency profitability optimization and is the host of the Agency Profit podcast that is focused on the agency space. Marcel, welcome to the Go for Launch podcast.
Thanks for having me, Brandon. It's a pleasure to be here.
Excellent. Well, there's a lot of P's in here we're going to talk about today, so I'm getting tripped on my P's, but thanks so much. First question is, where are you in the world today? And share something interesting about yourself that people may not know.
All right. I am tuning in from Moncton, New Brunswick, which is on the east coast of Canada, just north of Maine, across the border. And an interesting fact that people might not know about me. I could probably watch The Office on an endless loop for the rest of my life. If you told me I could not watch anything on TV other than The Office, I'd probably be okay with that. I love that show.
I'll watch it till she said.
Yeah, there it is.
That's what she said. Oh, man. Yeah, my wife and I love The Office. It's just unbelievably funny to this day. So that's great. Well, listen, you're into the agency business as I am, and I want to know about your particular journey. How did you get started in agency life?
Yeah, so my first business actually was an agency. I remember a friend of mine, or I don't even know, we were acquaintances, and he approached me one day and said, look, I've got a bunch of friends in the real estate space, and I think that there's an opportunity to do virtual reality kind of services for real estate. So that was back before the technology was really pervasive for doing 3D modeling of houses and doing turning a house into a model that you could tour with a VR headset. So we thought we'd be cutting edge and kind of be the first to get into that market. And so that was my first real business, was doing these services for real estate agents. And that's when I first became very, very acquainted with the idea of trying to run a service business on thin margins, what it meant to try and scale the delivery side of that, and all the challenges that come with it. And I ended up walking away from that business because I really couldn't find a way to get to unit economics that were going to scale. And I was looking at that stuff early on, and I can only imagine how painful it would have been to scale that business to a point where I had golden handcuffs on and couldn't really find people to outsource the work to profitably. So I'm glad that I got out when I did, but that's kind of where I got my first exposure to the service model. Then from there, I became highly interested in software and spent some time there, and ended up partnering with the founder of a software development agency, Jared, to start Parakeeto. And so we did a bunch of work in his agency, really kind of getting familiar with this problem space, and then started going out and working with other agencies to improve their profitability. And that led us kind of down this path.
Nice. Well, we'll get into that a little bit more, talking specifically about Parakeeto, but I want to just step back a second and maybe have you define for people what an agency is, because it's different to different people, but you kind of hit the nail on the head a little bit, Marcel, where you're a service business, but describe to the listeners that may not understand what that means. How do you actually get paid, as an agency, and what are the, pros and cons of calling yourself a service business or an agency?
Right. Yeah. So, agency, I think, defines more of a niche within the service or professional services kind of umbrella, which is, you're helping other companies generate more business for themselves. So you might be building websites, you might be doing marketing services, PR, creative, etc. That's kind of the market. But really, when you think about it and boil it down to its purest essence, you're no different than a landscaping company, a roofing company, or an accounting firm, or a legal firm. The thing that you all have in common that's fundamental to the business model is that you're basically in the business of brokering people's time. You need to have a skilled professional spend time doing work in order to deliver the thing that you promise to the client. And that is what is common about that business model. And it's the thing that I specialize in helping people optimize so that it's actually making them money, because we're working with human beings that tend to be very unpredictable and tend to be very hard to manage and scale. That comes with a whole bunch of unique challenges.
Yeah, absolutely. And, we're going to touch on a lot of that because when I think of agencies, the ones I've been in are typically advertising, marketing, public relations. We're selling services and absolutely selling time of people. That gets into a lot of, issues, as you hit on, Marcel, that it's very highly unpredictable. Even if you compare it to something like a landscape business, as an agency, you think, well, that should be a whole lot more predictable. But guess what? The landscape guy, yeah, he does the same stuff over and over, but on a daily basis, he or she also has a lot of unpredictability. They could be cutting the grass and hit a hornet's nest, and all of a sudden, their day is going to go off track, right? They're not going to have that half an hour that they budgeted for that, or it's going to start to rain or whatever. And it's the same in this service creative business, even more so, because when you're doing things like web design or creative work, it's really hard to pinpoint for each specific job how long that's going to take. But the thing is, I want to talk about this a little bit, Marcel. A lot of people perceive that agency model as very enticing. One of the reasons is the cost of entry these days is pretty much zero, right? You can slap up a website practically for free, in many cases for free, and get started and hang a shingle out and start working. And it's real sexy, but it's really actually hard to be profitable, is it not?
So I don't think it's hard to be profitable if you know how to do it and if you track the right numbers. I think that's an important misconception that I kind of want to snub is if you design the agency from day one, understanding what the model is, understanding what metrics you need to keep track of, and optimizing the way that you design your service offerings and the way you design your delivery processes and the way you go out and acquire clients around this idea of, we need to protect these margins of 50 to 70%, and we need to try and make our services predictable. I don't think it has to be super hard to be profitable, but that is the thing that nobody that's selling you this idea of you should start an agency is talking about, is that scaling an agency is challenging because it's not nearly as mechanical as a product business or maybe a software business or even a manufacturing business, which fundamentally has a lot of the same principles, but it's much more predictable because you're using machinery to produce, the outcomes and earn the revenue instead of human beings, which are by nature much less predictable. But yeah, you're absolutely right. The cost of entry is low. The risk around product market fit is low. Your ability to iterate is very low. You can be very nimble with the service business in the early days, get to product market fit quickly. But it's when you start selling more clients than you can service that you start to typically run into the real challenges of that business model.
Right. And I think a lot of the things you're touching on are the things that people don't think about on the front end. They don't go in thinking, oh, let's stop and time out and think about how are we going to be profitable and stuff. But you actually have a pretty neat formula I want to ask you about called the agency scaling quadrant, which is back to those 4 Ps of a scalable, profitable agency. Can you talk about what those 4 Ps are?
Yeah, absolutely. So the 4 Ps are, what I consider to be the 4 pillars that you kind of need to have in place in order to have both a scalable and profitable agency. And so the first one is precision. And this is something that is kind of a hot topic in the industry, and it's about niching down. But I want to be careful about my language around this because a lot of people interpret that as saying like you've got to hyper niche into a specific vertical or into a specific market. And all I really believe around this is that you just need to be precise about what problem you solve and be precise about who you understand and know in the market has that problem, and become really, really good at articulating how and why you're good at solving that problem. And if you can start to converge your service offerings around solving a specific problem, I think a lot of people get caught up in this idea of like, oh, you shouldn't be a full service agency. You should just focus on a handful of services. And maybe the solution to that problem is offering a wider range of services. But, my main focus around this is if you can converge around a single problem, then you can develop a system for solving that problem consistently. And if you can develop a system, then you can build something scalable out of that. And it's tied to something that has value. Solving that problem, as long as there's a lot of upside for your client, will likely allow you to command enough revenue for solving that problem to justify the process on the back end and still make a healthy margin. So the first thing is precision. That really has to do with your positioning, the servicing that you offer, and really kind of standardizing that. The next one after that is going to be all about essentially your process, right? So that's going to come down to understanding, how much time does it take you to earn this revenue, and really getting the systems in place to make sure that you're profitable. So making sure you've got the right margins when you design your services, making sure that you've got the right amount of time being used versus what you thought when you estimated that project or when you came up with your pricing, and making sure that you kind of have some basic processes in there to make the quality and the expense of doing that work consistent. And if you can do that well, that's going to be very, very, very helpful. After that, you want to kind of start looking at your people processes. So hopefully you're going to get into a spot where you're going to have this issue of we're selling more work than we can produce. And then what you're going to need to be able to do is scale. So if you've got your systems in place for producing your work, and those are fairly scalable and well documented, and if you know that those produce work that is highly consistent in terms of quality and takes a similar amount of time, then that's going to allow you to then hire people and onboard them more quickly. But the important thing there is what we want to make sure we're doing is we have a pipeline of talent that we have access to all the time. So maybe we've got a bench of freelancers that we're familiar with that are already kind of familiar with working with us. Maybe we're always doing interviews, always building relationships with candidates. And we've got a process for ramping people up, getting them trained, getting them familiar with how we do work inside of our agency, so that as you start to sell out ahead of your capacity, you can go and time your hires, get them productive, and make sure that you're not constantly pushing your people to the brink by selling more work than you can handle and then just trying to throw more man hours at it. And I skipped one, which is pipeline. So by the way, it starts with number one, precision. Number two is pipeline. So once you've figured out what problem you solve and who you solve it for, it's about really figuring out how do we sell that consistently. That is certainly the first problem to solve. Figure out how to get clients, figure out how to do that consistently, ideally in a way where it's predictable. You know, if we spend this much on Facebook ads, or if we send this many cold emails, or if we, get this many people on a webinar, then we should be able to generate this much revenue on the back end. Once you've done that, then it's about optimizing your process for actually delivering on the promise that you've made to your client. And then finally, it's about making sure you have a pipeline of people that you can then start to catch up to your sales with and get them ramped up, get them productive. So those are the 4 Ps, starting with precision, pipeline, process, and then people.
Those are killer pillars, by the way. I love those: precision, pipeline, process, and people. I think 2 of those that I know trip up a lot of people are process, where they just jump into something again, kind of, eyes will not necessarily wide open, but just, shiny object. Hey, I'm going to start this thing. And again, it's not that hard. Yeah. So you're doing work, typically solopreneur, or maybe a husband, wife, or you and a buddy. That's kind of how I started a web design firm, me and a friend, right? And you're 2 guys in a room, or you're 2 girls in a room with computers, and you're going crazy and you're doing your thing, and it's awesome. But when you're doing that, you're typically immediately on a hamster wheel if you're not thinking about process from day one. That goes back to that killer book, The E-Myth by Michael Gerber. You don't want to be the person doing all the work forever. And you need to be thinking from day one, how do I extricate myself from this so people don't expect me to be the number one sole person doing this work all day long? Because guess what? That does not scale, right? It doesn't matter how good you are, how fast, et cetera. You can only do so much work in a day. And then the other thing, like you said, is people, but for the same reasons, people think, oh, I'm the best to do this. I'm the graphic designer. I can't trust somebody else to do this. Or I'm the writer. Right. I'm the best programmer there is, et cetera. You have to get outside that mindset. And again, it kind of goes back to the pipeline, or the process, and probably the precision, right? Where you can, put that stuff down and systematize it. Yeah. And as long as you're able to do that, then you can offload, slowly but surely, that to other people and train them in the ways of the Jedi, or whatever you want to say, and let them go. Right? Does that sound accurate?
That's right. I always like to say 80% quality, 100% done by someone else is better than 100% quality, 100% done by you. And
Perfect.
that's
Yeah.
really the trade-off that you're probably going to have to make. But honestly, a lot of times you can end up finding people that are ideally better than you at that thing because that's all they do. And you're, by nature going to be wearing all the hats in the business. It's really hard, even if you are a tremendously talented programmer, or designer, or copywriter, to be really dedicated to your craft when you also have to manage the business and do the sales and oversee the finances and take care of the clients and take care of your team and still run your life. So yeah, 100%. And this is the thing that I encourage you to do if you're a freelancer or you're just starting your agency, or maybe you kind of have found yourself now accidentally running a business, which happens a lot with really talented creatives that go off on their own, and all of a sudden people are asking them for more work than they know how to do. They call their friends up, and it's like all of a sudden they're like, wow, I've got a business here. Start thinking about, the fundamental thing is, how much time do you think it should take you to do this thing? Does that allow you to potentially get to a margin of 50 to 70% on that service if you were to pay somebody else to do it? And then does it actually take that long?
Yeah.
If you can just get a handle on that, you will have a strong foundation to build all the operational systems into your agency that you're going to need in order to scale, to do things like resource planning and managing your capacity and protecting your profitability and scaling up your team. If you can get a basic handle on that fundamental thing of, can we accurately predict what it's going to take to earn this revenue and deliver this thing to the client, you will be so much better off. And if there's nothing else that you take away from this podcast, that's the thing I would encourage you to start thinking seriously about.
Well, speaking of that, what are some of those core metrics that an agency needs to track, Marcel? And number one, and how do they track them? And then finally, what are the benchmarks that you need to hit to be a high performing agency?
Yeah. So the first thing that I encourage everyone to pay attention to is some kind of a metric to track their earning efficiency as an agency. So the way to think about this is how much time, and time really means cost. So how much does it cost us to earn our revenue? Let's think about this for a moment. The fundamental difference with a service business, and this is probably true if you look at your contracts and the way that they're written. Even if I go and sell you a website, Brandon, I say, we're going to sell you a website for $100,000. I need 50% of that up front. So you write me a check for $50,000. The day that I get that check, yes, I have the cash, but from an accounting perspective, if you ask your accountant, if you're doing accrual accounting, that money doesn't yet belong to you. It's actually a liability, not an asset, because you haven't earned that revenue yet. And your contract probably says something to the effect of, like we need to deliver this particular deliverable or reach this certain milestone before that money actually belongs to us. So now your job is to take your team and set them on this work and get them to earn that revenue for you. And every hour and every day that goes by, they're using up fuel, which is their salary, that it's costing you money. And so you're incentivized to, I always like to look at it this way. Profit is a function of the volume of time it takes you to earn revenue. So it doesn't matter if you're billing by the hour, you're billing a flat rate, you're billing on value. You want to be incentivized to spend as little time as possible to get the thing done so that you can earn that revenue. So volume of time equals profit. And generally, for most people's contracts, the length of time is going to determine cash flow, because you're going to get these milestone payments, maybe partway through the engagement, at the end of the engagement when the work is done. And that's going to determine when the checks actually hit your bank account and when you have the cash to start moving through the business and paying your expenses. So the first metric is, how efficient are we earning our revenue? There's two good ways to measure that. The first is gross margin. And gross margin is basically looking at what is our adjusted gross income, and the definition of that is our revenue minus anything that's passed through us into somebody else. So this would be your ad spend, website templates, stock footage, like anything that you have to purchase to get the thing done, as well as any 1099 labor. So anyone that's not an employee that you then hire to start doing this work, you're basically passing that revenue through you as an agency into another entity. So once you've taken all of that out, you're going to have a number left over. That's your agency gross income, or adjusted gross income, AGI, as we like to call it. And that's basically the money that you're responsible for earning. And then we want to measure how efficiently did we earn that. And with gross margin, you're going to look at what did it cost us. And the cost is going to be a function of how much time did the team spend, and then what is the cost per hour for each team member. And the cost per hour is going to be a function of what's their salary divided by usually 2,080 hours a year. And that gives you a rough cost per hour for that team. So once you add all that up, you'll have a cost basis, you'll have adjusted gross income, and you want to figure out what the margin is there. And the goal is to be between 50 and 70%. Now, the challenge with gross margin is that was complicated. That probably went way above
Yeah, I
most
was going to
people's heads
say,
that were listening.
yeah, a lot of creatives
numbers.
are like, I don't want to, what? That's
Right.
math.
That sounds horrible.
Yeah, I don't want to
Totally.
do that. Yeah.
It's an accounting thing. Usually, the problem with gross margin is, yes, it's probably going to be more accurate than the alternative that I'm going to present to you, but not enough for that to really be worth the additional expense. Usually, you've got to have an accounting team, doing your books on a pretty regular cadence if you want to get this insight on any kind of regular basis. So the way that I recommend to track revenue earning efficiency is a much simpler number called average billable rate. And the way you do that math is you take your AGI and you divide it by the number of hours your team worked on that project. Mm-hmm. And that gives you like an hourly rate that dictates what was your actual hourly rate on this. And you can use that to get a sense of how efficiently did we earn this revenue. You can use that to compare different clients and different projects to each other. And you can use that to kind of do some quick math on, well, what's our average cost per hour for our team, and figure out kind of what your ballpark is for margin. It's going to be slightly less accurate, but it's still going to give you a great level of insight. It's still going to give you directionally accurate visibility into, where there's opportunities to, perhaps double down on highly profitable services, or, change up your process or your pricing to start to bring things up to the target that you want to have. So, metric number one, figure out how efficiently you're earning a revenue. Probably best to do that with ABR, or average billable rate, but you can also do it looking at gross margin in your accounting tool.
Wow, that is a great bunch of advice right there. So hopefully people are taking a lot of notes. I know I'm going to go back and, really study this myself. But, I would say from my experience too, Marcel, is that all that sounds awesome. And then really one of the greatest challenges on overarching all of that is managing your people properly. And one of the big reasons is because people will tend to let the work expand to fill the time required to complete it, right? There is a principle for that. And I'm drawing a blank on what that's actually called. Maybe it's not the Peter principle. That's when people get advanced too far beyond their capabilities or whatever. But anyway, let's say we're doing a website together and I hire you to code it, and I tell you have 5 hours. Guess what? You're probably going to max out at 5 hours, whereas you might have been able to get the work done in 2.5 or 3 hours. But I, as the manager, I got to manage you. And I also want to make sure that I'm not going to tell you got 5 hours and it takes you 25 hours. So therein lies a lot of conundrums where you've got to really manage that, study your history. Like you said, the more jobs that you do, the more data you get and the more experience you get, knowing that these types of jobs do take roughly this amount of time, give or take 5-10 hours or whatever. So what do you say about the management aspect overlaying all that?
Yeah. So it's a great point. And before we jump into that, I want to mention everyone, if you're listening to this in your car or at the gym and you can't take notes and there's all these numbers flying around, you can head to parakeeto.com/toolkit. And I've got a cheat sheet with pretty much all the metrics that I'll mention on the show today, the formula, the benchmark, and some useful videos to kind of walking through it. So
excellent.
You can head over there. Don't sweat. You don't have to take all these notes. So with that, on the management of people. So that's where kind of the second metric comes in, which is kind of looking at utilization. And utilization is important because we want to make sure that our team is spending a reasonable amount of time actually working on things that earn our business revenue. And as long as we're watching that in combination with our average billable rate or our revenue earning efficiency number, then we can get a good sense of how healthy the agency is at all times. And usually what we want to do is make sure that we are providing. This is a one thing I want to make clear about utilization. A lot of people look at that as like a target that we give to the team. No, that's your target as the management team. It's not your team's responsibility to find enough work to do. And actually that behavior is bad, because if you say, hey, Brandon, I need you to be 65% utilized this week, and they don't have enough work to do. What's Brandon going to do? Brandon's going to make the logo bigger.
Yeah, I'm going to.
Yeah, you're just going to find stuff to do.
Yeah.
So you're going to fudge the numbers, and to your point, you're going to paint an inaccurate picture of how long it takes to get something done, which is going to screw up our data, which is going to screw up our systems. And so we want to discourage that behavior as much as possible. But we certainly want to model our staffing and we want to model our sales, and we want to plan workouts so that on average our team can hit between a 65 and 75% utilization rate annually. And that's really just a function of how much time did they spend actually doing work for clients relative to the total amount of time they had available in the year, which is usually, again, 2,080 hours is about what it works out to. And then above that, how do we actually create a relationship with our team with this side of the business that's healthy? And that's something that I discuss in a core framework called the agency profitability flywheel, where we essentially talk about 4 important steps there. The first is capturing your estimates and standardizing those so that you're capturing, like, what are the assumptions we're making about our work, and you've got that clearly defined. The second step is measuring how those actually played out in reality, so tracking the time against the estimate and structuring those in the same way. That's something that we see all the time not done well, as the estimate says design hours, project management hours, et cetera. And then the time tracking tool, you're tracking time against wireframing, front end UI, prototype. And I'm like, well, what does that map to on the estimate? And that's the reason that maybe you're never looking at your time tracking data and feel like you're not getting value from it. So make sure you reconcile those things. And then that's going to give you some information that I encourage you to, in the second part of this flywheel, bring to the team and get them involved in that conversation. So say, hey, we thought this was going to take 5 hours, but it took us a lot less time than that. Why is that? What did we do differently on this project that maybe we can apply to our other projects, because it worked really well? And this is a project that didn't go the way we planned. Why is that? Was there something about our process that we need to change? Maybe we need to change the way we're estimating that. And we want to ask our team for their feedback and get them surfacing ideas on how to become more efficient, so that we can then empower them to say, hey, that's a really great idea. Would you like to create a process and implement it so that we can carry that forward in the way that we do things, and get them really being the owners, the stewards, and kind of the people that are building and maintaining the processes in our business that make it more efficient. And that's going to do 2 things. It's going to help them understand the value of the time that they're tracking. Because I think that's one of the things that, if you talk to most agency employees about timesheets, it's this thing that they feel like they're just kind of doing, and they don't understand why. They're not really realizing any value from it. And the story in their head is probably, this is just a way for my boss to keep tabs on how much I'm working. And that's really not the purpose of that exercise. And then the second thing is, I'm sure you've run into this problem before, is we create these processes, but nobody's following them. Well, it should start to solve that problem, because now your team is the one creating the process. So they're much more likely to follow it, to try and get their peers to follow it, to keep them up to date, to maintain them, because they have ownership over those processes, and they're the ones that created them. They're the ones that came up with them because they thought it was a good idea. So that's kind of how I think about solving that management issue, is get your team involved in the process of making the business more efficient, incentivize them to do that, and they will start to think of the way they do their work in that way. And that should kind of take care of itself over time if you facilitate that process the right way.
That is such strong advice, Marcel, in terms of giving those employees the understanding, the knowledge, the ownership, and the involvement. Because I've seen this, personally. If you just give people the work and tell them go do the work, and they don't understand how this is involved in the overall profitability of the company, which, again, like you said, most people don't even think about, right? They're just, I've got my job, I've got to do my job, and I don't really care. But if they don't care about the profit, they don't understand that the company has to be profitable, they could be out of a job, sooner rather than later. And if by the same token, if they understand that they need to be utilized, what that means, and what their numbers look like. For example, if you just told people, hey, we expect you to be 65% at capacity, if you will, in terms of working. What does that mean? Okay, Marcel, let's sit and talk about that. And why is that important? Because if you're not there, then we're not going to need you, and we're going to get rid of you. Or if you're way over, then we're going to probably have to bring other resources in to take some stuff off your plate or whatever. So point being, everything you said was fantastic, and people need to know that. And speaking of, let's just transition quickly to talk about your SaaS business, Parakeeto, sure, which is Parakeeto, which helps a lot of service businesses track some of these numbers, right? Tell us about what Parakeeto is all about, and how people can maximize their profitability using it.
Yeah, so I mean, basically, what Parakeeto is set out to become is the agency profitability platform, and our starting point for that is what I believe is the most fundamental bedrock process that you need to nail in your agency to become scalable and profitable, which is creating accurate estimates and standardizing what those look like and standardizing your process for that. So our tool helps you pick projects from your past that you've done before to help you inform new estimates. So for example, if you asked me to build you a website today, Brandon, I could go and say, okay, here's 3 websites that I've built in the past that look similar to that. It pulls them into this beautiful workspace and allows you to see for each task that you've tracked time against, how today's estimate compares to those past projects that you've had, and even has some smart algorithms in there to help you figure out if the client's budget is this, how many hours should I be budgeting for all these services, and helps you kind of automatically create these estimates and make sure that they're accurate and build that accuracy muscle over time. So those first 2 pieces of the agency profitability flywheel, which is capture your estimates and then track your actuals, it basically helps you implement that process in a best practice way and create that feedback loop so that you have that strong foundation. So yeah, if you're interested in checking that out, go ahead and check out our website. We've got a free trial there, and if we don't integrate with your tool, make sure that you still fill out that request, and we'll notify you when we do integrate with the tools you're using.
Excellent. I'll have a link over to Parakeeto over at the show notes page as well. And just to let people know, right now, I believe you're integrated with one of the big platforms for time tracking, right? Is that Harvest, correct?
That is Harvest. That's kind of been our first big integration.
Okay, so you do have on your roadmap to integrate with other time tracking systems as well?
We do, yeah. And a lot of that's being driven by the tools that people are mentioning they're using when they sign up for our email list or when they start a trial with Parakeeto. So yeah, encourage you to do that, if nothing else, just to help us understand what we should be integrating with next.
What looks popular outside of Harvest? Because I use Harvest. I've used it for years. Yeah. It's a great product. It's fairly affordable. It helps, with billing, time tracking, and all that type thing. But what do you think is next? 2 or 3 on the map?
So when we look at our data, it's kind of similar to the way the CRM market looked like 10 years ago, when it was like Salesforce and then everything else. Right. That's kind of what the time tracking market looks like. It's actually Harvest. The biggest one is spreadsheet or none, unfortunately. So yeah. A lot more people not tracking time than actually tracking time. And then after Harvest, you've got a couple, Toggle, Clockify. Yeah. There's EverHour, right? So those would be kind of some of the top ones. And then after that, it's just a ton of one-off tools, a handful of people using this, that, and the other thing. So it becomes very fragmented very quickly after that.
Okay. Is it possibly to use something like Zapier or if this and that to, hook your stuff together with all these other disparate tools?
We are talking about all kinds of creative ways to solve that problem. I think there is a solution in there, and we're certainly exploring that as a team.
All right. Well, excellent. We have been talking to Marcel Petitpas of Parakeeto at parakeeto.com. And it's been a fantastic conversation again about agency profitability, which is so important. And, it goes without saying that people are probably listening to this going, oh my gosh, I got into my agency and I'm not profitable. So definitely go back, listen to this several times, take notes, and go take advantage. Give us that URL one more time where they can go get your toolkit.
Yeah, so parakeeto.com/toolkit if you want to get access to basically, yeah, it's almost like a course on how to implement the agency profitability flywheel, and it comes with templates and spreadsheets and cheat sheets and everything you need to get that implemented. And if you like listening to nerdy content like this about agency profitability, check out our podcast as well. It's called the Agency Profit Podcast, and we talk about this stuff all the time. And with that, Brandon, thanks so much for having me on the show, man. This was great.
Outstanding. Thank you.